On most days, we go in depth on a single story, but once a month, we like to take a step back to gather fresh insight and analysis from those covering world events. We've put together a panel of distinguished journalists. Joining us now is Ching-Yi Chang. He's the White House correspondent and U.S. News Center chief editor for Shanghai Media Group. Yasmeen Alamiri is a senior political reporter for the online publication Rare. Paulo Sotero is a longtime Brazilian journalist and the director of the Brazil Institute at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. And Martin Ganslmeier is a correspondent and bureau chief for ARD German Radio. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Paulo, let's start with you because you're the Brazilian at the table. So right now, the opening ceremony for the 2016 Olympics is underway. And, you know, I think it's safe to say that it's been a long haul for Brazil. We had political problems, still have political problems, economic issues, security issues, and of course, to top that all, we had the Zika virus making an appearance as well. Still, Brazil's come a long way. Are we going to see another great show that, like the one we saw in 2014 at the World Cup?
Oh, I think so. I think the event itself, especially the opening ceremony, will be quite impressed, quite moving. As I mentioned, you know, we have a great capacity to laugh and to be joyful even in the face of adversity. The event tonight, as prepared, is quite spectacular from descriptions, from a preview, and things will come together after many difficulties that you described. Let's hope that there is nothing similar to a terrorist attack or anything of the sort. Rio has its own challenges. Brazil is in the midst of its worst economic crisis and one of the most serious political crises in memory. But we made the commitment to host the games. We are going to start hosting the games tonight, and let's hope for the better.
Yasmeen, what's your view? I mean, here we have Brazil, tough times for the country. I mean, as Paulo was talking there, Dilma Rousseff faces impeachment. The country's economy is having problems right now. It depends on commodities. Commodity prices are dropping. The oil price is dropping. Do you think it's going to overcome all these challenges?
So I think there's two things to consider right now when it comes to Brazil, right? We're in the midst right now of the opening ceremonies. Yeah. And there's the obvious, which is that Zika is an imminent threat. People are very worried about it. There's also, I mean, overwhelming sanitary issues. World Health Organizations have come out and said that they're actually asking athletes to not submerge their head underwater, to not, if they are in contact with some of the water which has high levels of fecal matter in it, to wash it off quickly. I mean, these are overwhelming issues that are very hard to overlook. But at the same time, what you have in this Olympic process is something that we haven't seen in a while, which is the inclusion of the refugee team. And I think that it's very easy as journalists for us to focus on the negativity. Yes, Brazil's in the middle of a very deep-seated economic crisis, and there are these overwhelming health issues that are taking place where a lot of athletes are dropping out. But there's also the romanticism that I think we can't really forget about when we speak about the Olympics. This refugee team of 10 people includes people from Syria and from Ethiopia and Congo and South Sudan. And for these people and for a lot of people, coming to a game like the Olympic Games is really the only thing that they have to look forward to. And it brings a nation that's otherwise in despair in the middle of something that's romantic and so much bigger than they are. And I think that we can't overlook it. You know, I think it would be irresponsible for us to say the story is just Zika or the health issues or the crisis. I think for a lot of these people, you see a lot of hearts being opened during these games. So I think, yes, of course, there are things that we can't look past, but there's also something that really will bring all of us together at the TV screen and watching these Rio games. And then it brings that sense of hope back for a lot of these countries that really need something to root for.
Right, perhaps despite those problems, this is the time for Brazil to have the Olympic Games.
I think so.
Ching-Yi Chang, now you come from China. China hosted the Games in 2008. We remember the Bird's Eye Nest, those big ceremonies that took place in Beijing. When you look, you know, there's very ambivalent attitudes from people about hosting the Olympic Games. I mean, do you see that China derived a lot of benefits from hosting these games, or did it end up with a lot of problems?
Of course, a lot of benefits. As we can see, we can, first of all, we can recall in 1960s, Japan and also 1980s, South Korea hosted the Olympic Games, and that it makes an enter for them to go on the world stage. So that makes the same thing for China to become a real world, a global player. Of course, China was much bigger than the second largest economy at that time, so much bigger than Japan and South Korea. That's one benefit. The other thing is, of course, people talking about the heavy investment, but it's paying back. You see the bird nest or the water cube. Now it hosts the concert or other shows. It's paying back, advertisement and tourism. Attract a lot of tourists to go to bird nest and all those place. So it's paying back. And the other thing is also, one of the beneficial thing is that Beijing at that time invested heavily on infrastructure.
Right.
And we still remember back to 2008, it was the most state-of-the-art Olympic Game, a lot of technology. So at that time, so we still see that, and at that time also created a lot of opportunity in the field of technology for young people. So it's really good to create that opportunity, and also internationally it promotes China's soft power globally. Domestically, a lot of young people probably they don't know much about the international those sports. Right. For example, fencing. Now it becomes popular in China. So it's all very beneficial. One drawback I would say is that it attracted too many foreign tourists. You know,
that's
Beijing,
a bad thing?
Beijing is already overcrowded, you know that.
Okay.
So, but that's also a good thing that helps Beijing to think about how to solve that issue. So we see a lot of mass transportation. It's doing really well. So, yeah.
Martin, getting back to the Rio Olympics, and Paulo mentioned something there, one problem that could become a problem, and that is the security threat that the Games face. There's always the threat of terrorism. Do you think Brazil's done enough to prepare for this?
Well, we hope that Brazil has done enough. Obviously, especially Europe right now is very, very sensitive to terror danger. And what we've heard is that they have started pretty late, but now they really have wrapped it up. And I think right in time for the start of the Olympics, they are probably paying really attention. Security will be tight, and we definitely hope that nothing will happen.
I want to stay with you for our next topic, and that is terrorism. It stays with terrorism, and that is terrorism in Europe. Europe's been the target of several attacks recently, 4 in Germany, 7 in France. When you look at Germany, how is Germany responding to those attacks?
Well, the last 4 weeks really have been bad. And just today, a new poll came out, and Chancellor Merkel, who still was very popular in Germany, really got a beating from this. I mean, the majority now of Germans say that the refugee policy probably was a mistake. And that's not a good sign for her. That should be alarming. Next year, there will be...
Remind us again, what is the refugee policy?
The refugee policy in Germany was very, very open. And last year, it's pretty much a year ago, Chancellor Merkel saw that there was a really big need. There were hundreds of thousands of Syrians coming. And it was really a massive problem. And she said they are welcome. Germany's refugee policy always was pretty liberal because of the experience in World War II. Right. Germany, in its constitution, has that we are very welcoming to political refugees. And the majority of Germans was pretty welcoming. There was even joy that they are here now, they will be safe. And probably the Germans underestimated the problems that come along with that. And now a year later, we are really at a decisive point because of the terror attacks. Now it's important to mention that those terror attacks, most of them were done by people who grew up in France, in Belgium, in Germany, so not by the refugees. Right. But the latest, they were done by some refugees. And I think that made people think, are we really secure? Is it going to be worse? And I'm afraid if in the next months there will be more terrorist attacks in Germany and in France, with the elections in 2017 in Germany and in France, that could be a problem.
It seems, if I may interject,
sure,
it seems like it's the making of a perfect storm right now in Europe. You have a lot of anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee sentiment that's building up, and then you see these residual, some would call it lone wolf attacks that retroactively then become ISIS-claimed attacks. And I think we saw that in Europe this summer, where there were a couple of people that had been living in the States that they ended up attacking, and they had acted in, authorities say, on their own volition and weren't acting on mandate from ISIS, but then after the attacks were carried out, said that ISIS had claimed responsibility for it. And you wonder how much of the sentiment that a lot of Muslims in these countries are reacting to, because the anti-refugee sentiment, where there's a lot of hostility and a lot of resentment at the fact that these refugees are being led into these European countries so openly, you wonder how much of that plays into this feeling of disenfranchisement of these residents of these countries in Europe.
I still want to mention that there is still a majority of Germans that are willing to help, that are willing to do good things for the refugees, that are trying to integrate them. So, but the mood right now is right at the edge, and we don't know how it's going to develop.
Do you think they will reverse the refugee policy?
I don't think they will reverse it. I mean, what they have done now is an agreement with Turkey, obviously, so that no more come in. And I think for the last 3 or 4 months that was working pretty well. Yeah. And now there's new discussions, especially with all the things happening in Turkey. Will this be really a stable pact? Will we can be able to rely on that? Or will it crumble? And then we have a new problem. So the next months will be decisive.
Yeah, Ching-Yi Chang, we've looked at the threat that the Rio Games face. China has a huge contingent going to Rio. I think it's the biggest contingent of athletes ever from China to an Olympic Games. Has there been any talk in China about this threat that they may face out there?
Yeah, they talk about this issue. Of course, they have been very cautious about this issue. I think they've done also prepare those people who attend these Olympic Games, prepare them really well to let them know what can they do if anything happens.